Good morning, and thank you again for coming. Isn't spring in Georgia magnificent, with sympathies for those who suffer from the pollen? I like to reverse the master title a little bit because the truth is that rather than being a master, I work in my master's garden. I am an unapologetic lover of God's creation. As Dr. Armitage says, we have sore gardeners, we have grumpy gardeners, we have keen gardeners, and we have broke gardeners. But there's no such thing as an old gardener because there's too much to look forward to. It's about faith in future beauty, faith in tomorrow. Planting a garden means that you believe in tomorrow. We are, however, as gardeners, a funny lot. Plants are our one common denominator, and yet talking about those plants can inspire passion, lust, and near rioting among otherwise law-abiding citizens. One of the most fascinating things I learned recently is that there's a bacteria, a good bacteria, in the soil which stimulates our feel-good hormones. And that explains why people like me unconsciously remove our garden gloves and feel better for having done so. This could explain the why of why you get your hands dirty. One writer says that gardeners are not only happier, but they are also smarter, or could be, because that same bacteria apparently increases learning ability. One philosopher put it this way: I go to nature to be soothed and healed and to have my senses put in order. There's a large body of scientific evidence that speaks of the health benefits of spending time under the canopy of a living forest. With gardening, the doing is the thing. And if by some happy chance you should have a little success, well, that is just gravy on top, and you have a huge triumph. Many research studies are showing that there is precious little that is more healing than working with plants and the earth. There are benefits of beauty, and seeing the sky or feeling the sun on your back can literally make you feel better. And please note that I am using the term garden as the Brits do, and it would mean your lawn, your landscaping, trees, everything but the vegetable garden. And funnily enough, the vegetable garden is called the vegetable garden. I'm reminded of someone who came new to our property, and he said, I'd like to see the garden, where is it? And I had to say, you're standing in it, it's all around you. And so what is a garden? It's just this: a piece of land that you have designated, whether it's large or small, as a place to grow whatever you want to grow. We are a family of writers and proofreaders and editors, and so the most natural thing for me is to take this principle of editing to my garden. You can always edit out much easier than editing in, and just think, you can edit out all your mistakes. So plan to edit. Plants are like furniture. Move them around until you find the perfect place. A dead plant is not the end of the world. Just think of it as an opportunity to buy a new one. So our situation is this: we have been blessed with several acres of Georgia forest with streams, shoals, granite, and mature tree height native azaleas. My husband likes to say that we have several acres of untouched Georgia forest, but I'm touching every acre that I can. And all I had at the beginning was that very dangerous commodity, a love of nature, but a very little knowledge. I had stumbled upon a gardener's dream, but I was utterly terrified that I would destroy some rare plant or some other, or do some damage. Friends have kindly said that we have a slice of Eden, but we also have, it seems, every enemy known to man. For my first topic, I just want to talk about that fourth season, winter, because it's often overlooked as a gardening opportunity. We can virtually have 4 seasons here, year-round interest. And again, a friend says, we live in Georgia not for the summers, but for the winters. Winter is a wonderful time for revealing the bones of the garden, seeing it as a skeleton to build on. And fundamentally, remember, all gardening is just transferring your vision into a reality. Can we have the first quote there? Yes. Anyone who thinks gardening begins in the spring and ends in the fall is missing the best part of the whole year. For gardening begins in January with the dream. Next. And that's our winter shot. There is beauty to be had in winter, with the cinnamon-colored exfoliating bark of the crepe myrtles, any and all of the weeping tree varieties, and the elegant and twisty branches of Japanese maples. The coral bark is particularly gorgeous, and the North American beech tree, which retains its coppery-colored leaves until the new growth in the spring. You know, if you stand near that tree while it still has its old leaves on, it actually can sound like gentle music playing. Hellebores begin flowering in January, which to me is nothing short of a miracle. And I have found that they will take a lot more sun than most shade plants do. They look wonderful, by the way, when interspersed with daffodils. And as I mentioned daffodils, I think it's a good thing when you buy them to buy early, mid, and late varieties, because they extend the flowering season for so long. I have had daffodils for well over 2 months now. And I adore daffodils simply because the deer don't. And they also fit one of my gardening principles. The most beauty achieved by the most economical means possible, which I guess you could say is the most bang for your buck. I continue to be blown away by the incredible beauty of camellias, which do so well here, and they give winter color. And I think their blossoms are just staggeringly beautiful. And of course, the evergreens really shine in winter and they feed our appetite for color. I'm sure that you've all heard that it's the prerogative of the gardener to say, you should have seen it last week, or you should see it next month. And dedicated gardeners also follow this formula. You say to your garden at least 3 times, you are not in charge of me, you are not in charge of me, you are not in charge of me. I say it to the property as I leave, but it does not work for me. My love of gardening began in England, where it doesn't matter if your land is the size of a pocket handkerchief. You still create as much beauty as you can. You make the most of what you have. And I tend to think that in England, more men are gardeners than women. And from those men, I learned this philosophy. The idea is that you should romance your land. I found this stunning, and I will let you reflect on it and make of it what you will. But it is interesting that gardens in France are known for their flair, gardens in Italy known for their elegance, but English gardens are known for their romance. Go figure. Okay, so some pictures now mostly to do with shade. This is our bridge with native azaleas behind it, and a heron who just happened by one day. And that picture we just love because you see the little guy in the middle of the mums. I hope you can see him. Next. Dragonfly on top of a wood structure. Okay. And this is just what happens to us in our woods. Okay. That I just took. It used to be an old fertilizer spreader, I think. And with a name like Buzzard, you have to make the most of it. And I take the opportunity to say, Buzzard in England is not a vulture. It's a noble bird like the eagle. Hydrangeas are wonderful in shade, absolutely wonderful. Passion flower grow very easily here. And that's one of the paths that created with stone that we were left with. And that's just a path in the making. I like to use bits from the woods. This is actually thanks to poison ivy, which twisted up and around. And that too, from the woods to adorn plants and so on. Okay, this is our stream, and that's the Japanese forest grass that I've planted along the banks, and it does very well. That's just a captivating photo, we thought. Rhododendron, again, wonderful for shade. I just use this frame to show that the way I paint is by gardening. That was a garden tour that we had. And I just included this to show that in the foreground, that's a native azalea which seeded itself there, but of course I can't get it out, and you know, I would kill it if I did, but it's very interesting how they seed themselves. This is a Tulip Poplar which is planted, if you can see, right in the middle of the stream. Its taproot goes straight down. The tree is very healthy, but it's rather amazing, the root structure. Yes? Oh, that. The next one will show why we took that, just because the photographer got his picture in it as well. That's okay. Next, and this is our stream, our waterfall, and with azaleas all along the side. Some are huge, very mature, tree height, very fragrant. Some of them. It's another shot. And I like to intermingle the color. I'm getting more and more of the different colors. And this plant is Peacock Fern. It's an amazing plant at ground cover, and you can see it has an iridescent sort of sheen to it. It can almost look turquoise. And it varies. This is all the same plant, but according to how much sun it gets, it takes on a very different color. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you can make it happy, please try to go for it. And that's one of the native azaleas, and in the gold color. That's out now, by the way, right now. The coral vine on the arbor. And this is our stream when we've had a little bit of rain. We'll show you in a moment. When we have had rain for 2 or 3 days, that really builds up. Our placid, serene little stream becomes white water. It actually carried that bridge away one day. Years ago, after one of the hurricanes, we had unrelenting rain for 3 days or so. And that bridge, which is sort of 6,000 pounds, built on telephone poles, disappeared. It went sailing in the middle of the night, and we had to find it when the water receded and rebuild it. Just a few words then about shade. In the southeast, we have more trees in our towns and landscapes than do most other parts of the US. Those trees produce the shade, which can be a real opportunity for us. On the handout, I've given you the various categories of shade, so just try to figure out your degree of shade so that you don't waste time and money. Shade gives us the opportunity to experience subtle colors and textures that could be lost in bright sun. And those trees that give us our shade are like monuments. They dictate and dominate. They're the lungs of the universe, but remember, they can be edited. And also bear this in mind, because plants growing in shade receive less sun, they will have less energy to produce prolific blooms, and the bloom season can also be shorter. But flowers are fleeting and foliage is forever, or at least till the end of the season. So in this case, if you don't like the foliage of a shade plant, move on to another one. It's all about the foliage. One of the first things I would do when thinking of a woodland garden is to create a path. And of course, if you have a path, you have to entice people to go down it. You must make it tempting. Make the journey worth the effort. Reward them with something special or humorous. I have a shoe garden. Can we go to the shoe garden picture? An Englishman left his shoes at our house and said it was too expensive to mail them back to him. Something special or humorous. Englishman left his shoes at our house and said it was too expensive to mail them back to him, and so I didn't, but I planted them. And although they may look like little fairy shoes, I promise you they were ordinary size men's leather shoes, and I'm told quite expensive. But they are now part of my shoe garden. So in creating a pathway, remember, you direct the traffic. And by the way, speaking of paths, I must say children love to walk in circles for some reason. So don't hesitate to do a circular path. And speaking of children, I love to have them play around with the names of some of the plants. They love saying things like Magilla perilla, or Sarcococa, or Grancy graybeard, Pipsissewa, or Selaginella. They just love saying these things. And I make it a point to try to fascinate children with objects that I've found in the woods or games you can play there. Have you heard of what one child said to her mother? "Stop working and let's go outside and get some use out of this world." And why try explaining miracles to children when you can just have them plant a garden? And I think that for a child to nurture plants teaches them something we really cannot do. And one garden writer even admitted that even more than the plants, he loved their names. He loved the mouthfeel of trying to pronounce and remember long and complicated and perhaps humorous names. So again, if your shade is not ideal, it still has potential. It's your job to find a plant that likes it there. The old adage, if life gives you a lemon. Personally, I love moss and I encourage it. I have a moss garden. I love that soft look and gorgeous color. And shade too, a shade can give serenity, a kind of oasis for you. And all the pluses that go with it, less frequent watering, less sweating. So in creating a garden, one important principle is to ask the right question. What do you want from your garden? Do you want privacy and intimacy, a sense of enclosure and sanctuary? Or do you want calm or bold and beautiful or fragrance? You decide what kind of look you want, and that will dictate what sort of plants you have. I've spent enough time in England so that the cottage garden look really appeals to me. Dense and lush, perhaps you would say even crowded, but it's up to you what kind of mood you want to create in your garden. I think that gardens should have both structure and perhaps even a bit of humor. Structure is important to relieve and refresh the eye, to take it off the ground and add that third dimension. And it would be the writer in me that says that structure can act like an exclamation point. And another principle is repetition. Repetition of the same plant or the same colors. It makes things cohesive, holds things together. it gives a kind of continuity. And this may go against the grain for some. I have been in garden centers where I have wanted one of everything. But you must say no to this impulse. It is imperative to say no to one of everything, because it can look like a sort of hodgepodge, or as the Brits would say, a feckless mess. If you think of color by numbers, and just how few colors are used and how often they're repeated. And you can Google, by the way, for all types of categories of plants. Plants that spread, plants that have long-lasting bloom, plants for texture, plants for fragrance. You can even Google specifically for the best blue flowers for shade. One gardener I know keeps a list of the plants that she would never have in her garden, even if they were dead. And I remember with affection some of the quips of the late Dr. Sams, who said he wouldn't have English ivy even if the Queen of England were to give herself were to give it to him. And we're also indebted to Dr. Sams, who let us in on that southern secret of what the plural of y'all is. And it is, of course, as you know, all y'all. Okay, so next group of pictures. Okay, the houses. Can we go back, please, to that blue gentian? I know we have had it. There we go. I have to tell you a story about the gentian, because this is a flower I found in my woodlands, and it opens so late in the season, very late October, November even, and the blossoms don't actually open more than that. It's sort of like a balloon. It stays like that. This is the story of the gentian. My question is, of course, how on earth does that become pollinated, since the bees have gone in their hives? Discovering such mysteries and solving them is one of the great pleasures of gardening and of seeing in the finest sense of the word. Once you really see the bottled gentian, which this is, you realize that the solution to its problem is elegant simplicity. The honeybee has already retreated to its hive for the winter, but bumblebees continue to buzz and bumble even on brisk days, provided that those days are sunny. Now watch closely. Here comes a bumblebee. Unerringly, he heads for a gentian flower, lands on it in a trice and disappears. He has popped inside where there's food, drink, and warm lodging. On cool days, he'll spend anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour or more in there before moving on to the next flower. And in the meantime, he's acquired a goodly amount of pollen. I have gently opened the gentian's petals and found a bumblebee quite obviously asleep, protected from the wind and cold by a blue gentian overcoat. For a few minutes on a chilly afternoon, nothing can rival the enjoyment of solving a garden mystery. Okay. Now we will go to our second set of pictures, okay, we'll leave these just for a minute. And starting from that and going forward. Mm-hmm. Please. Then next. Okay, I'll come back. Okay, this is in the middle of our border, and we'll talk. I'll go back to this later. Okay, Ceanothus. This is a plant which is called the California lilac. We'll talk. This is in the middle of our border, and we'll talk. I'll go back to this later. Okay, Ceanothus. This is a plant which is called the California lilac. It has almost everything you could possibly want. It's free flowering, it has lovely foliage, it's drought tolerant, it grows quickly, it's fragrant, it has masses of blue or purple flowers. I know that some stately homes in England use them as a foundation planting, but they're absolutely everywhere in England, and they blossom exuberantly. They're often at the entrance of homes, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. If you get the right variety, they will grow quite nicely here. A gorgeous, gorgeous plant. Okay, let's go on. Okay, this is our garden with red buds and phlox in the early spring, dogwood and so on. And this is muhly grass, M-U-H-L-Y, muhly grass with that lovely shaft of light shining through. Chaste tree, which is very, very pretty in bloom. And there's our dog's tail mingling nicely with the muhly grass. Wisteria. And this one is Amethyst Falls, which isn't so invasive. And it's interesting that in England, both the ivy and the wisteria just are not invasive in the same way that they are here. That's, again, phlox and dogwood in the early spring. And this picture I just included because the evergreen that's second to the left on that arbor had branches right down to the ground, but it completely blocked out a garden which is on the level below it. So I just took the principles of editing and took off the lower branches, and it sort of opened up things very nicely for us. That is from a Chinese rice paper plant that I cast in concrete. And that is that same rice paper plant. This, of course, is elephant's ear. Very easy to cast in concrete, and created kind of, that's caladium. And then that was my final piece. And phlox, again, which you can see that I love. And that was actually just yesterday. So it's well and truly out. That's the Graham Thomas climbing rose. And a kind of courtyard garden. I think that's Bowl of Beauty clematis. New Dawn rose. And that was, the light's not so good there, but just to show another pathway I created. And the snowball viburnum doing its thing. Siberian iris. There's a story behind this. This is flowering almond, which I brought from Illinois, where we lived for several years. And since it was Illinois, you can only imagine how desperate we were for spring. So this is such an early blossoming shrub. And back in the day, you could actually buy Kleenex tissues in pastel colors. So my girls got hold of pink Kleenex and formed them into blossoms and attached them to the branches of flowering almond before it came out, so that they could trick me into thinking spring was here. Clematis. Mm-hmm. And this I have a sample of at the back table. It's the Chinese, not rice paper, Chinese, losing, what do I call it? Chinese tree peony, yes. And it's one of the most long-lived plants ever. Oh, yeah, camellia in the winter. Okay. And of course I'm spreading daffodils, naturalizing them. And that's the story of our bridge. That's fall, of course. And I love the Japanese maples and all that they do. That's our home in fall. One of the best ideas we ever imported from England is the idea of the perennial border. This idea first came as a rebellious one, rather like that tea party we had long ago, rebelling against rigid, geometric, contrived Victorian gardens. The perennial border is the signature of the cottage garden, which goes back centuries and originated in Elizabethan times as a source of herbs and fruits and flower. The flowers were just thrown in the empty spaces. It was reinvented in the 1870s as a reaction to the formality which dictated that you employed a gardener to maintain your property. The perennial border is a far more natural combination of plants, imitating the arrangement of plants in nature, and also these borders tend to have visual interest all season long, as the different varieties go in and out of season. So this border would include small trees, woody shrubs, flowering vines, evergreens, bulbs and annuals, and of course some vegetables. On your handout, I've noted some of the typical cottage garden plants. And by the way, perennials are defined as long-lived plants that require little care once their basic needs are met. What more could you ask for? Cottage gardens, it seems, always have roses as a mainstay. And just think of all the adjectives such as rambling, billowing, overflowing, tumbling, jostling, spilling, even frothy, and those words describe a cottage garden. A densely planted but casual mixture packed into a small area, depending on grace and charm and simplicity rather than formality. It uses what might be termed old-fashioned plants, with natives being very popular. So to create a cottage garden here, we would make use of our own natives. To try to grow the flowering ferns or the delphiniums here that are so often found in English cottage gardens might be wishing that pigs could fly. When the cottage garden took the new casual form, it suddenly became very fashionable, and it gave access to the middle class to actually have a garden on a modest budget and on a DIY basis. And at that point, the cottage garden emigrated to America. The object is not perfection, but happiness and satisfaction. The Brits say that it's a mad mix, a jumble, that produces this charming but controlled chaos. It could be called a vegetable garden that's been overtaken by flowers. And as you are probably thinking, it does take at least a little bit of artistic management to create the natural look. One key to achieving this look is to plant flowers just at the edges of beds, allowing and even encouraging them to spill over into the pathways and onto the lawn. The whole approach is less concerned with rules than with what you really love. And in exchange, it offers exuberance and abundance. The magic is not in having the biggest garden, but it is in making whatever space you have as beautiful as it possibly can be. The interesting thing about a cottage garden is that you don't actually have to have a cottage. But they show how very full and dense the plantings are and how they overflow onto the pavement there, the walkway. And another one, just overtaken by plants, the brick walkway and colorful. And that too. And you see the roses and poppies, and those are often mainstays of the cottage garden. One other principle that I think has worked for me is to touch with a light hand. When we found our property, the idea that I could unwittingly destroy some fragile, rare something or that was unknown to me caused me to say no to heavy equipment. And it's paid off because we found trillium and gentian and bloodroot and all kinds of wonderful things in the woods. So I would advocate a principle of gentle gardening, at least until you know what you have. And I have some miscellaneous tips here. Whimsy. It brings formality down a notch, but of course less is more. Slopes are wonderful. You just have to find out what likes it there. Vines give an almost immediate maturity, gardening vertically, gardening in the air, as it were. And that's, of course, wonderful for limited space. Just garden upwards. Think of your garden in terms of outdoor rooms. It's very helpful to manage large spaces, and it can really make the garden inviting. You should have, or could have, a deck in the woods as an outdoor room. You can achieve similar results to inside decorating. For instance, if you have a very small space, you can do much to make it seem bigger. You could use huge leaved plants and texture. You can make a small garden think big. And also you can break the rules once you know them. You know, the general rule of thumb would be to put the taller plants at the back. But for example, with Queen Anne's lace, which you can actually see through, it's very effective at the front of the border. And confession time here, my very worst habit has been to ignore the size that a plant will grow to. And because of this, I have spent way too long transplanting. But as it's said, you're not a real gardener until you've moved things 3 times. And remember that just because it says dwarf does not mean it's small. So, our growing conditions in the south require that plants overcome a combination of very high temperatures and very high humidity. Our summers don't just fry vegetation, they steam and broil it overnight. Not only must a plant survive under these conditions, it must also bloom, grow well with minimal care, and make a good display. Doesn't this sound like we're asking the impossible? Well, among the plants, the majority that would fulfill these criteria are the natives. And so I would encourage the use of natives, and also because they fit the thinking of sustainability and the preservation of resources. And with natives, the palette is still large and interesting. You know, the early botanists considered that the native azalea was the most graceful and showy shrub yet known. So our collaboration with nature is what it's all about. Not redesigning it. It's about restoring the balance of nature by encouraging pollinators and recognizing that everything is designed to be in perfect harmony with its local environment. It's an interlocking system, the food chain really being the web of life. I think that what you gain from being in the garden is exponentially more than what you put in. When you leave, it seems you have more answers than you had before, and perhaps even questions that you didn't know your mind was asking. So whether you view garden work as a burden or a blessing is up to you, whether you're annoyed by it or thankful for it. The work, I think, pales in contrast to the benefits. Everyone seems to be trying to escape everything, but we might just be running the wrong way. The art of gardening and the art of life are not dissimilar. And so, if there is a secret ingredient, if there is, it would be the sweat that runs down the handle of the spade. It is inconceivable to me that there are people who are not attracted to and fascinated by the great natural laboratory that we live in, of earth, water, sun, and seeds. And so my best advice is to romance your land. And the payback is enormous, out of all proportion to all that you put into it. The pleasure is worth the pain. And the most important thing that you could put in your garden is yourself. Be there. And that's all I know.